beginning. Implementing bio abilities and ID 2020 facial recognition.
Welcome, everyone, to Brighteon Conversations. I'm Mike Adams, the founder of Brighteon, which is becoming even more important as a platform for free speech as the censorship is going insane. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, a first-time guest for us, but many of you know his work, Operation Freedom. His name is Dr. Dave Janda, and he's a former orthopedic surgeon, retired, but he has been working to help set America free, fighting for health freedom, medical freedom, freedom of speech, a very important voice for our time, and I'm a fan of his work. I watch his videos whenever they appear on Brighteon.com, and he's also got a radio show that we'll talk about here in a minute. Dr. Dave Janda joins us on Brighteon today. Thank you, Dr. Janda. It's great to have you on.
Mike, it's an honor to be with you and with your audience. I am a huge fan and have been a huge fan of yours for many years, and I'd like to thank you. You have put yourself on the line. You have sacrificed to provide information that what I call the bought-off mainstream fake media will never provide, and you have been punished for that, but you have been rewarded in a sense that everybody respects what you do and how you do it, and I thank you.
Well, I've come to the point where I no longer trust anyone unless they are being maliciously smeared by the media and censored. And you are in that group as well, and it's because you talk about the truth. You espouse freedom. Now, I want to ask your opinion and get into this. Right now, big tech is maliciously censoring that group of frontline doctors who are talking about hydroxychloroquine as a preventive measure and a treatment measure to halt the coronavirus pandemic in a matter of weeks, in their view. Now, we used to live in a country where you were supposed to get a second opinion from different doctors. Now, the second opinion is blacklisted. You can only have one opinion, according to big tech. What do you make of this situation, and how dangerous, in your opinion, is it becoming that big tech has a monopoly over medical advice now?
Well, I believe this has been going on. You know, it's interesting. Many people criticized you and criticized me for years when we've said, look, we're being censored. Big tech, what I call the medical industrial complex, is censoring us. And many people were calling you and me that we were paranoid, that we were conspiracy theorists. It's interesting. Those same people that were saying that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, are now saying that the same thing we have been saying for many years, because all of a sudden they are in the limelight, or they are presenting information, and they realize, wait a minute, we're being censored. I mean, this week, you have some doctors in front of the Supreme Court speaking, as you mentioned, about the benefits of hydroxychloroquine. And what happens? All their presentations on social media are deep sixed. Sidney Powell's a friend of mine, the attorney for General Flynn. Sidney Powell's a friend of mine. Sidney Powell retweeted that video along with Donald Trump Jr. and were deplatformed from Twitter. And again, this is nothing new to many of us that have taken a stand for freedom early on.
Well, that's right. Twitter deplatformed me years ago. YouTube deplatformed me years ago. That's why I created Brighteon.com after YouTube took me offline. And people like you and I have been subjected to this for many years. But like you say, you and I have been warning people that this was coming, and we were called conspiracy theorists when we accurately predicted and warned about exactly what's happening today, where we are now living under a tyrannical, techno-authoritarian regime that is clearly going to decide that there's only one allowable opinion on every topic, whether it's health, nutrition, medicine, politics, even history. If you don't have the right view of history, then you're going to be deplatformed. This is untenable. This isn't science. It isn't medicine. It isn't even human civilization. If you can't disagree and raise counter arguments, then we don't have a civilization at all. It can't even sustain itself.
110% agree. You know, Mike, I wish I could argue with you on this, but I'm 110% in your camp. Yeah. Example, Representative, I live in Michigan. Representative from one of the poorest areas of Detroit, Karen Whitsett, I recently had as a guest. Karen is a Democrat. She's very outspoken. And she also developed coronavirus back in March. When Karen Whitsett developed coronavirus, she had some underlying medical conditions, Lyme disease and the like. She became very ill, and she wanted to have hydroxychloroquine. Now, at the time when she needed it, our governor in the state of Michigan, a totalitarian thug, and I mean
one of the most evil governors in history.
That's Gretchen Whitmer, what I call Corona Gretchen, or there are many names for her. But she had her Department of Enforcement, and I heard about this from my friends who are still practicing in the state, saying, Dave, you got to say something about this because no one else in the state of Michigan has the guts enough to talk about this. We're getting letters from the enforcement board saying that, well, they cloak the first paragraph in that, well, don't prescribe this and hoard it for your family or your friends. But there are 3 other paragraphs, Dave, and they were all sending me these letters. And the second, third, and fourth paragraphs were, by the way, if you as a practicing physician or you as a dispensing pharmacist provide hydroxychloroquine for someone with a diagnosis of coronavirus, there are administrative actions that are going to be put into effect to, if you will, discontinue your license. Now, Mike, thousands of physicians in our state and around the country should have stood up and voiced their concern. This is a political hack who has no functional medical knowledge, Gretchen Whitmer, practicing medicine without a license. Mike, there was one brave reporter from the Detroit News and this big mouth. That's it in the state of Michigan that went off on this. And luckily, we got the avenues, not through social media, but other means where it got out to the public, to the point where 4 days later, Whitmer ended up rescinding that letter, opening up hydroxychloroquine, and then 4 days later went to the national stockpile to get more. The point is, Mike, when I became a physician back in 1984, I put my hand up and I took an oath. And part of that oath, the Hippocratic Oath, was to do no harm. The harm Gretchen Whitmer inflicted on the people of Michigan has not even been counted. How many people died because they didn't have a means to an effective treatment, that being hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin with zinc? And to this date, the data, and this is what the totalitarians do, they hide the data. Well, luckily for Karen Whitsett, that representative who came on my show, she ended up getting far enough down the line where she could get access to hydroxychloroquine and had a physician that had the courage enough to prescribe it. Because even though the penalties were reduced, there was still this underlying theme of, we're watching you, and you better behave to the docs and to the pharmacists. Well, Karen was going down the tubes to the point where they were about to admit her and she was going to have to go on a ventilator. Within 2 hours of her taking her first dose of hydroxychloroquine with zithromycin and zinc, her symptoms improved to the point where she didn't go on a ventilator and she recovered. And here is the censorship. Karen Whitsett had the audacity, Mike, to thank the President of the United States for calling attention to hydroxychloroquine and Zithromax, because if he had not, she would not have known. And she publicly thanked him. In fact, later in the week, President Trump invites her to the White House. And you probably saw that on the video. She publicly thanked him. And then when she came back from Washington, she was censured by the Democrat Party, who are running people against her, so that she is put out of office. This is the totalitarian, not just mindset, but these are everybody thinks that the only totalitarians are these terrorists in Seattle and Minneapolis and in Chicago and you name the city, in Portland. Oh no, they're totalitarians, Mike, that have sport coats on and dresses on and ties, and they're in government. And if people don't believe that, if they watched Attorney General Barr's hearing the other day in front of Congress, that is another branch of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, the organization, is different than some of these peaceful protesters. As you well know, Mike, in the charter of Black Lives Matter, they talk about destruction of the nuclear family. They talk about being their own, one of their founders, Patrice Cullors. They're, quote, trained Marxist terrorists. Her words, not mine. I mean, these are who we are dealing with. They are oppression-oriented people, and that's their goal and objective.
You're absolutely right. You hit upon so many issues there. You know, the left-wing protesters want to talk about police brutality. What you are describing here is medical brutality or medical terrorism against the United States, especially with the politicization of this particular drug, hydroxychloroquine, which has been off patent for decades, so it really can't make any money for Big Pharma. So now you see Democrat politicians would rather see Americans suffer and die than to see Trump proven correct about an off-patent drug. And they would rather see Americans suffer and die so that they can make more money and have more power when vaccines are rolled out, so they can have that narrative, oh, that we need vaccines. Look, people are still dying. They would rather that happen than to have a low-cost, very safe, off-patent drug be widely available to prevent, treat, and cure COVID-19. This is a level of maliciousness that really, to compare this in history, you have to go to mass murderers, you have to go to genocidal leaders like Stalin and Mao. That's the only comparison in human history. It is mass murder in the name of medicine intertwined with dark left-wing politics.
Again, I'd like to disagree with you, but I can't. And you're right, Mike, it is all about the money. Right? Because that's what it comes down to. It comes down to their hatred for Trump, as you mentioned, and it comes down to their totalitarian roots, and it comes down to the ever precious and that they just love and just idolize, the greenback, the dollar, and how much can go into their pocket. Because you're right, hydroxychloroquine, zithromat, zinc, pennies.
Zinc is the cheapest mineral on the planet.
But when you start looking at an antiviral or you start looking at a vaccine, you're looking at $100, $200, $300. You're looking at big bucks. And that's what drives this. And that's what's so sick. And that's why, Mike, you get deplatformed, why you get censored, why I get censored. You know, Mike, I want to take you back in time, and it's a little ancient history, but in 1988, my role was not only an orthopedic surgeon, but I continue to this day. My work has been in prevention. And one of the studies that I was a lead investigator for, this was when I was back at the University of Michigan, looked at injuries and in prevention of injuries. Rather than, as a surgeon, treating people that were injured, my philosophy was, why don't we just prevent the injury from the first place? And we did a series of studies, and it turned out that I was a lead investigator for a study that, according to the federal government, led to the prevention of 1.7 million people from being injured every year and saving $2 billion in healthcare costs.
Vitamin D.
In that series of studies, Mike, we spent $1,000 once. Okay? Now, that got the attention of then President Reagan. It was the end part of his presidency. And I was contacted by President Reagan, one of his assistants, if I would come to Washington and work with then Surgeon General C. Everett Koop on healthcare policy. And I did. When the president calls, you answer. And I went there. And when I first got there, this is 1988 now, they took some of us that were new into a room and said, we want everybody on the same page of the playbook. And we want you on the bosses, that being Ronald Reagan's playbook. And here is the playbook. The right-left axis, direct quote, is theater. It's meant to divide. The axis you are here to work on for public policy is the up-down axis up being freedom and down being oppression. There are people, they said, in government. They didn't say deep state. They didn't say globalist syndicate. But they said there are people in government and associated with government and tentacles into government that want to oppress people. They want to strip them of your freedoms. And your goal is present public policy to the president that focuses on freedom that will ultimately defeat those that are on the oppression side of this. That was 1988. 1988. And that's where we are today. And in fact, in a recent video I put up on YouTube just this week, I had a video clip of Ronald Reagan giving a speech in favor of Barry Goldwater in 1964. And in 1964, 24 years before I was told this, he talks about this very axis in his presentation. And that's where we are today, Mike. This is about freedom versus oppression.
Well, let's get into that, how they are using this coronavirus pandemic to crush freedom and to mandate so many things. But first, let me give out your website. Folks, you got to listen to Dr. Dave Janda here with more frequency. Go to davejanda.com. He's also got Operation Freedom, which is his channel name on YouTube. And also, Dave, your radio show, I know there's a listen live button on your website. When does your radio show air?
It airs every Sunday. It's a live show from 2 to 5 Eastern. And all they have to do is go to davejanda.com. There's a listen live button right toward the top in the middle. They just hit that. That'll link into Wham Talk 1600 streaming service, and they just hit play, and they're with us. And then if folks want the podcast of the show afterwards, we do have a very, very cost-effective subscription service where you not only get the podcast from not just that show, but every show all the way back to the inception of the show 10 years ago. But the other two shows I do